His love of music was diverse.
Nobuo Uematsu is very melody-focused. He really likes the Beatles, bluegrass.
I love rock. I grew up listening to Led Zeppelin.
He started his career with a collection of simple tunes.
Like one of the most well-known sounds in video games is that victory sound. Da 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 da.
He overcame the limits of technology.
With his NES and SNES music, it was just brilliant considering what limited tools he was working with.
And created one of the greatest musical dynasties in gaming.
Immediately when you turn on a Final Fantasy game, you hear the soundtrack rolling into your speakers and you know you're in for a big, big adventure.
He's right up there with Madonna and Britney Spears over in Japan. When this guy comes out with the soundtrack, people are listening.
This is the story of Nobuo Uematsu. On March 21st, 1959, Nobuo Uematsu is born in Kochi City, Japan.
My home, Kochi, is about an hour by plane from Tokyo. It was kind of a countryside. There was a lot of nature. When I was in elementary school, rather than going to the city for amusement, I'd go to swim in the river or get a tent and go camping.
It's not long before this young boy from the countryside finds something he loves.
As for music, I enjoyed listening to it from a very young age.
When he is 12, Uematsu gets even more involved with music.
In my high school years, rock and pop music were very popular, and my friends wanted to get a band together. At the very start, I think we were playing Beatles tunes. A lot of people play the guitar, and the bass and drums weren't for me. So when asked what I could play, I thought, well, there's a piano at my house, so why not the keyboards? That's how I became a keyboard player.
He's kind of a very traditional musician. He's very melody-focused.
I love rock. I grew up listening to Led Zeppelin.
He really likes the Beatles, bluegrass. Those are some of his musical influences.
Elton John writes such unique melodies. No one else writes melodies like him. I really admire that about him.
Nobuo goes on to attend the University of Kanagawa. After graduating, he spends time composing music for commercials and playing keyboard in an amateur band. But one day in 1985, fate steps in.
At that time, I lived in the building where a lot of aspiring artists, writers, and musicians would get together every night to drink. One time, a girl who was working in planning at Square came along. She said, "There's a music job at Square. Do you want to try it?" I said, "I'll do it." And that's how it started.
Square was a very small publisher in Japan. They'd come out with a number of RPGs for the tiny floppy disk type games for the Nintendo Famicom here in Japan. And they produced a handful of cartridges. But really there was nothing to distinguish them, to set them apart from the large number of small development houses that were able to thrive in Japan.
By 1986, Uematsu is hard at work for Square composing music for both the Famicom and a Japanese computer called the PC-88. His early work includes Blasty, Rad Racer, and 3D World Runner. But all is not well with the small software developer.
Square made a ton of games, and some of them stuck, but not all of them were popular. Even though they had a small level of success, they were in a fair bit of financial trouble. Really, they needed not just a hit, but a mega hit if they were going to keep the company around.
Now that Uematsu has a job doing what he loves, the company he works for might go under. However, Square still has one more game up its sleeve, and Uematsu is tapped to be its composer. In 1987, Nobuo Uematsu is tasked with composing the music for what Square thinks may be its last title.
Square was having some financial trouble.
Final Fantasy, the name came from the finality of it. It was seen as the final project for the company. Basically, it was their one last shot at redemption.
The story was, it was called Final Fantasy because, like, if that game didn't do well, that was it for them. So it was the final, attempt to save the company.
Near the end of 1987, Square releases Final Fantasy for the Famicom in Japan. Both the game and Uematsu's soundtrack win high praise.
Final Fantasy, like the very first one, it saved Square, so they could keep on making these games.
And gamers begin to take notice of Uematsu's music.
One of the most memorable things about the first Final Fantasy is the way it uses motifs, like a John Williams score, a movie score. Each part of the game has music which sounds like that part of the game. When you go out into the field, you hear the exciting exploration theme. When you're in a battle, it gets tense. When you're in the ice cave, it's mysterious. At each stage of the game, he came up with a really great and fitting song. Many different styles that really strung together made a soundtrack. It wasn't just background music.
1 year later, Square releases Final Fantasy II, and again, the music is composed by Uematsu. Interest in the Final Fantasy series continues to grow, and people love the music.
In my mind, Nobuo Uematsu, he really brought a lot of soul to the Final Fantasy games.
Well, it's simple music, so it's easily received by people. It's easy to understand. And what I'm trying to do, also what Final Fantasy is trying to do, is not say something complicated.
Nobuo's music becomes so popular that a CD featuring his work from both Final Fantasy games is released on December 21st, 1988.
Like, one of the most well-known sounds in video games is that victory sound when you defeat somebody in a Final Fantasy game. It's like da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Like, everyone recognizes that music if they played any Final Fantasy games. And also, the Final Fantasy II Nintendo game had the score that was really beautiful.
In 1989, Uematsu composes the music for Final Fantasy Legends on the Game Boy. 1 year later, he continues his work writing the music for both Final Fantasy III and Final Fantasy Legends II. In 1991, Uematsu's talent is given a little more room to soar when the Final Fantasy games move up to the 16-bit Super Famicom, which would later be released in the US as the Super Nintendo.
With his NES and SNES music, it was just brilliant considering what limited tools he was working with. He was able to get players to really feel a story with the music itself, and a lot of people think that that's his best stuff. Even though he has more powerful tools to work with, they really think he just brought something really special back then.
Uematsu composes music for the next 3 Final Fantasy games, and also lends a hand by writing some pieces for the hit RPG Chrono Trigger.
Final Fantasy VI was a graphical powerhouse. It was the most beautiful game you'd ever seen. It had a fantastic musical score. The music is widely considered to be Nobuo Uematsu's best score. It has close to 100 tracks. Each of the 14 playable characters has their own theme. There's a large variety of music for the different locations, for the enemies and bosses. It's just chock full of music, and it's some of the best work he's ever done.
But even with the new advancements in game hardware, Uematsu is still limited by technology.
I think compared to what we can do now, limitations were huge. The amount of notes you can use were so small that you couldn't really do anything outside of what was provided in front of you. So even if I wanted to challenge myself, I think the limitations were right in front of my eyes. I didn't really have that much room to work with.
However, a new system is just around the corner, and it will open up nearly limitless musical possibilities for Nobuo Uematsu.